I don't think anyone here is going to deny that Endbringer is a very cool title to have. I also don't think anyone's going to deny that the times it's shown up in the Xenoblade series are some of the highlights of the respective games. But this is Xenoblade we're talking about. The connection can't go just, oh, we reused a name. There has to be something deeper in there, and I do very, very much think there is. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what Endbringer means, and even come up with a possible Endbringer in one of the games that doesn't use the title, as well as discuss the actual connections between all of these Endbringers and why they all have or deserve the same title. This is a very spoilery topic, so I'm going to need full game spoilers for Xenoblades 1, X, and 2, and absolutely nothing from Torna because it's unfortunately not relevant to this discussion. But with that out of the way, we should talk about what the Endbringers actually are. The first time the actual title Endbringer shows up is in X, where it's given to the highest level enemy and one of the most imposing super bosses, Telethia the Endbringer, also known by an equally good title, the Ruler of Fates, by the native Nopon of Mira. Endbringer is also used in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, when Malos refers to himself as it in Chapter 7. So we got an Endbringer in X and an Endbringer in 2, and believe it or not, Xenoblade 1 is going to be the weird odd one out here as opposed to X, which it is in almost every other situation, in that the equivalent of the Endbringer in that game is actually plural. And you probably know what we're getting at here. Malos is the main villain. Telethia the Endbringer is a Telethia. The Endbringers from Xenoblade 1, or at least my opinion of them, are the Telethia as an entire species. They're controlled by the main villain, and they're the original appearance of Telethia in the first place. With that being said, though, it's time for X to become the odd one out again, because the fact that Xenoblades 1 and 2 have very, very similar plots to each other means the role the Endbringers play in both of those plots are a lot closer than either of them are to X's. So we're gonna compare and contrast those first, then we'll talk about the X incarnation, and finally reconcile everything together. Now we need to start really, really basic to begin drawing connections between Malos and the entire species of Telethia from Xenoblade 1. The first and most basic thing is, the final plan of both main villains of both games is to destroy all life as well as the world with it, and they have a very large army with which to do so. Zenza has the Telethia, which he sends to attack Colony 6, which is basically the last line of defense for all life on Bionis and Mechonis, and where pretty much all of the important characters besides the main party are at the time. Malos has Torna, and Torna has a huge army of artificial blades, which is sent to attack all of the Titan nation capitals, while Jin and Malos are ascending the world tree. While it's obviously not an exact one-to-one in terms of plot, if you look at those two scenes side by side, they are very similar, so it's obvious that the developers were trying to draw a big parallel there. It's mentioned that in universe, the word Telethia means that which eliminates impure life. Basically, the Telethia originated as cells from Zenza's own body that he cast off and used to, I guess, exert his control more directly and more remotely so he didn't have to physically be there and do stuff himself, and that their job was to destroy life and return it to the Bionis so that Zenza would continuously have ether and have power in order to do his thing, including trying to reset the universe. So really, while it means that which eliminates impure life, their definition of impure life is, well, everyone who isn't Zenza or a Telethia, and I'm not really sure how much you can argue that Telethia actually aren't just also Zenza. While yes, it is heavily implied that some of the turned Hyantia do retain those memories when they're transformed into Telethia, and Callian has his moments, it seems like that's just an exception, and the memory thing doesn't seem to inhibit the fact that Telethia act exactly according to Zenza's bidding. They are his cells, and while yes, over the generations they must have evolved to be a bit less like him, they still have that gene that allows him to completely take over. And for the most part, it seems that this army is basically mindless slaves, mindless drones, almost like robots but of flesh, under the control of Zenza, for the explicit purpose of killing people in his quest to destroy the world. Compare that to Malos, who, while his goals might not have been as extreme from the beginning, by the time he calls himself Endbringer, his intent is to scale the world tree, kill the architect, and then use the power of Artifice Ion to eliminate all of humanity, and possibly destroy the Earth as well. That one's kind of left up in the air, but he could just mean destroy the entire biosphere, which is hard enough to do, and definitely something Ion is capable of. But I digress. Melos puts more stock in his actual allies. That's the big difference between him and Zenza, besides all of the personality thing. Zenza is lonely and wants friends. Melos has some very close friends who all feel that they have been wronged extremely by humanity and want to destroy it in some way in order to get back. So while Melos definitely puts more stock in his friends, especially because without all of his Aegis powers, he was only as strong or weaker than them, and Jin was easily the most powerful member of Torna, he still did recognize the fact that they couldn't take on the entire world alone, and as such, part of Torna's big bad plan was to construct the artificial blades and use those to fight with, carry out assaults on the other Titans with, and all of that kind of thing. These artificial blades are different from ones like Poppy or Lila because they do not seem to be sentient. They're called artificial blades, but in reality, they're basically just robots that are roughly as strong as an actual blade would be. And as such, they are mindless robots as opposed to very obviously sentient ones, again, like Poppy, who you have as an example, and to a much lesser extent, all of the blades. They are completely subservient and 100% under the control of Torna, mostly just the leaders Jin and Melos, but it's probably likely that the other three would have some modicum of control over them as well. So, we've got two villains, both of them using armies to attack the greater world while they themselves ascend to a high location to try and complete their goals before they're killed by the party. One villain calls himself the Endbringer, and the species of the other villain's army is given the title Endbringer in a later game, so I'd say we've got a pretty strong connection there. Another parallel the two games have that's very close to the whole Endbringer thing is also the idea of trinities, although this type of trinity is separate from Zenza's trinity of disciples or the trinity of Aegises, because this one is the protagonist and two powers, strong entities that already existed in the universe, one female, one male. The protagonist allies with the female one in order to fight the male one. In Xenoblade 1, the trinity is the three gods. Shulk allies with Maneth to fight Zenza. Everything in this universe, though, is encompassed under the third Aegis Ontos, and the Endbringer in this context is the Telethia race, which was created by Zenza, and are also sort of part of Zenza. In 2, the trinity is the other two Aegises and Rex. Rex allies with Numa to stop Malos. Everything here is governed by Klaus and the Conduit, so it's a weird double-layered feedback loop type thing, where everything in one universe is under the control of one of the Aegises, while the universe that has the other two Aegises is largely under the control of an alternate version of one of the not omnipotent people from the other universe. That's kind of weird. But into the Endbringer is Melos directly, also acting through his legion of artificial blades, which basically has the same effect as Zenza being able to act through his Telethia. So there's a lot of close-knit stuff there, and you could definitely say that Melos and the artificial blades are the Xenoblade 2 equivalent of Zenza and the Telethia, and as such, this is where X comes in. It's being the odd one out because X is very special, but it is the first game to use the title Endbringer itself, and associates it with a being that, while it is ostensibly the most powerful enemy in the game, isn't necessarily an evil one, and one that actually saves your life, not as part of some other grander plan like Zenza might do. Telethia the Endbringer is not necessarily a benevolent creature, but it is far more neutral than Zenza or Malos would ever be. Most of the time, it's just kind of out there flying around doing its own thing, but if sufficient danger is posed to the inhabitants of Mira, including life forms that aren't native there that just happen to get stuck there or colonize it, it will step in and protect them. This is, interestingly enough, basically Telethia doing the same thing that its name would have meant in the universe of Xenoblade 1, to purge impure life. It's just that this singular Telethia has a much, much narrower definition of what constitutes impure than all of the ones under the control of Zenza. Zenza's definition of impure life is anything that isn't Zenza, while Telethia the Endbringer's definition is a bit more nuanced. Keep in mind, there is a large army out to genocide all life besides itself in X. It's the Ganglion, and it isn't the Endbringer in this scenario. But what is interesting is, despite being the guardian of life on Mira, Telethia never really steps in and does anything about it. For the most part, yes, it will only fight back if attacked, or that one time when it's trying to test you, but there are 2 times where it does step in and take the initiative. The first is during the main story, where it saves the party from a group of 3 tainted sphinxes after they just barely took care of one on their own, and then later on in a much, much later optional side quest, it attacks Orphe and seems to take offense or try to eliminate the Ova. From this, we could tell that Telethia the Endbringer's definition of impure life is basically weird diseases or viruses that it doesn't understand. The Tainted are never completely explained, but there's some sort of weird mutant creature that attacks all life on sight, and the Ova is basically a virus that connects the minds of all the Orphe and turns them into the hive mind that we see them as. While yeah, we'd definitely argue that the Ova is a good thing, it has been noticed that it was able to infect some indigens of Mira that had devoured and killed an Orphe, so you could see where the Telethia was coming from. What we don't know is why it didn't just eliminate all the Tainted on its own. It might just be that it's too many even for it, and it didn't want to get in there while the Ganglion was fighting its huge war against it, because we do see them take on an even larger force of Tainted than we can fight ourselves. It maybe thought it would get caught in the crossfire and self-preservation overruled there, but it looks like its job is to get rid of any weird things that might be infecting and corrupting all the creatures that live on Mira. The one thing that puzzles me most here is where the name Endbringer came from in universe for X. It's the guardian of life to the Nalpan, and it's just possible that the blade saw the destructive power it had fighting the Sphinxes and was just like, yeah, this thing will destroy us if we pick a fight with it. But I think it might be tied to a few other things. First off, we know from the same side quest where Telethia attacks Orphe that the Ova has memory of a similar or identical creature from long ago in the past on its original home planet before it came anywhere near the Orphe. This implies that either Telethia the Endbringer or the Telethia species in the X universe, we're not actually sure if that species exists, because the only other Telethia besides the big one we see are in squad missions, and those are dubious as to their canonicity. But we do know that in some way, Telethia are interstellar beings. Now, the only other interstellar species besides the ones that have spaceships and that kind of space travel that we see is the Igroliths, which are led by Pharsis the Everqueen, the only definitively canon member of the species. These things are genuine monsters. Interstellar dragons that are bigger than many skells put together, and when they arrive on a planet, they drain it of all its ether and resources, destroying the biosphere and ruining all life. And when they run into each other in outer space, they sometimes fight. And when they do that, planets are destroyed as collateral. So, it looks like the Everqueen is just biding her time, possibly resting after a battle, and hasn't really started sucking Mira's resources dry as of X. But we do know that if it kept doing that, it would probably get the attention of Telethia the Endbringer, and there would probably be a fight. And that would probably mean the end of Mira as we know it, or possibly the end of Mira as a whole. So Endbringer could definitely come from that, where if its full power was unleashed and put upon the actual civilizations of Mira as opposed to specific indigents doing things, then it would definitely spell the end times, or if it were to actually fight something on the same level as it. There's also the other possibility that these two spacefaring giant dragons with immense power that have connection to ether, Telethia controls it, Yggdrasil's eat it, are related somehow, and the Endbringer is actually some sort of mutant Yggdrasil or other subspecies of it, and that would definitely mean it deserves the name if it has the same planetary scale destructive power the rest of the species do. Also, Space Telethia is very cool. This, though, isn't very connected to the other general idea of the Endbringers, but it's referred to in the bestiary as the color of unclean life forms, which it tries to be to its own standards and own opinions, which probably differ from a lot of other people, namely the life forms it's trying to cull. The interesting thing, though, is that the one that originated the title Endbringer isn't the one that actively seeks out the apocalypse. It will bring a swift end to anyone who tries to defeat it, which is again backed up by its bestiary entry, which says that it's never been bested in combat. This can be a complete lie if you've killed it multiple times on the same save file you're reading that on, like me, but it's worth noting that you are required technically to fight it 3 times. The first is for L's affinity mission, the Nabhan Air, in which case it's just testing you, it has lower stats, it's a scripted fight that ends very shortly, and then you carry on with the quest. The second time is just for the hex on the Mira map that requires you to defeat it, like most tyrants do, and the third is one of the possible paths of the quest A Fateful Choice. This one is optional, but if you do choose to kill the Telethia, you'll get a few extra cutscenes which explain the interesting OVA connection I kept mentioning before. We're almost done here, but I do think it's necessary to finally bring everything together and talk about the Endbringers as a whole. All 3 of these Endbringers, just counting the XC1 Telethia as a collective group because it makes more sense to do it this way, are one of the most important parts to their respective games, both in terms of lore and in terms of main story as it goes up and reaches a climax. Much less so for X, but since the side quests are a lot of the story, it is possible to have your climactic final fight with the Endbringer built up throughout the game, first off seeing it in the main story mission, then seeing it in the Nabhan Air where you're nearing the level cap, but nowhere near an optimized build, and then finally when you have to make the fateful choice to actually take it on. In general, these Endbringers seek to destroy some or all life in the world, and do so for various reasons, but for the most part because they deem some life impure or unworthy to exist. They're also extremely powerful beings in-universe, possibly among the strongest, and tend to have some relatively difficult fights. The Endbringer isn't hard per se by X-Super Boss standards, but you need to do a lot of prep to get rid of it. Lorithia, I don't need to say anything more, and for Xenoblade 2, the first fight with Malos in the Cliffs of Moratha is regarded by many to be one of the hardest in the game, partially because you don't have your own Aegis to back up your fight against him. Regardless though, the Xenoblade 1 Telethia specifically have some roots going back to even older Xeno games, so I would be very, very surprised if this whole concept of the Endbringer isn't brought forward into future Xenoblade and Xeno titles, because it's one of the big through lines the series has, and honestly, I couldn't complain at all because, like I started the video with, the Endbringers are always some of the best parts of their games. But that is everything for today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, thank you very much for watching, and thank you especially to all of the patrons you're seeing on screen now, who are helping make Xenogears and Xenosaga on this channel a reality. And special thanks to Lily Starflame and Dead Pat for their extremely generous contributions. Next week is going to be the second Xenoblade 1 character in D&D week, and I decided that I'm going to leave the choice of which character to do next up to a patron poll. Polls are available to anyone who pledges any amount of money, just $1 will do. So if you want to influence that, you know what to do. Because, you know, there aren't many people, so your vote would proportionally mean a lot and quite possibly sway in the favor of the character you want to do. Anyway, it's like 3:30 in the morning while I'm recording this, and I need to be up at 6 for an 8 a.m. class, so I'm going to go to bed now. And until next time, this is Luxin, signing off.